I grew up in Frostburg, Maryland on 26 West College. If you ever go to college there, go up there. 26 College is right down the street from the college, the main campus. And when I grew up there in the 60s and 70s, everybody who lived in my neighborhood was either a factory worker or a professor for the college. And in our neighborhood, all of the fathers worked at factories. My dad worked PPG. My best friends, Davises, worked at PPG. He had Kelly Springfield. They would work different shifts. You worked daylight, which was 7 to 3. You worked second shift, which was 3 to 11. Or you worked cat-eye, which was 11 to 7 at night. My dad worked daylight. But my best friend, Ricky and Jody Davis, they lived 2 doors up. Their dad worked cat-eye, so he'd go to work at 11 at night and come home 7 o'clock in the morning. And we were like brothers. Jody was my age. Rick was 2 years older. 2 doors down from me, they lived in this neighborhood. We had a little sidewalk, and everybody had a fence. Yards were fenced. Right next to Davis's, I never knew why. The Aldridges lived there. They were an older couple. The kids were gone. He was a lawyer. She was always dressed up. My mother would go to church. She would dress up. This woman dressed like that every day. Dress, hairdo, high heels, you name it. And she did not like us at all. If we threw a ball or a frisbee or a lawn chart over there, she'd grab it, take it in the house. Our parents wouldn't back us, and they said, you don't bother the Aldridges, leave them alone. I always wanted, when they died, I always wanted access to that basement because they had a lot of my crap down in that basement. And every summer we did something when we were in elementary school. We had a project. One summer we decided we were going to dig the china, and we went to Davis's yard. We had a bunch of digging hoes and shovels and picks and axes and you name it. And the nice thing about it was we had no supervision. Mrs. Davis worked. She was the only mother I knew that worked during the day. She worked at a pharmacy, and she worked 8 to 4. Well, she was gone. Mr. Davis was upstairs. He's a really strong man. He made windshields. If you ever pick up a windshield, you know. He was like a bodybuilder. He had a roll. When he went to bed at 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, he said, never wake me up unless the flames are licking my ass. And when he said it, he meant it. If he grabbed you, he would whip you. He didn't care if you were his or not. He paddled me a lot of times. Well, this particular day, we're down in the backyard. We're digging a hole. And Jody, we didn't know then. We thought he was just nuts, but he had ADHD. We didn't know it then. But anyway, he's up in this tree next to their yard. The Aldridges had this really beautiful cherry tree that produced those big red-black Bing cherries. And we had eaten a ton of them. We were sick of them. And he was up in this tree throwing cherries down. He would pick these big, fat, paintball-like, gooey, rotten cherries and hit us. If you've ever been in a cherry battle or grape battle, I personally would take a handful of cherries right to the face opposed to the back of the neck. They get in your ears and go down the back of your shirt. And we're down there, and he's flipping these cherries down at us. We were not allowed in this cherry tree at all. The rule was, don't go to the cherry tree. Well, we're down there digging, all of a sudden we hear this wham. We look up to the house. Mr. Davis is out on the side stoop of the house, and he has no shirt on, and his boxers are turned around. His feet were like, his toenails looked like parrot beaks. They were big, hard, yellow monstrosities. And he's coming down through the yard like that. And we're like, Joe, get out. And he's like, yeah, right. And he's throwing cherries. And we're like, get out, Joe. He wouldn't listen. I looked up. Miss Audrey was sitting on her deck, tapping her toe, kind of smirking at us. Eventually, Mr. Davis made it down to where we were. We ran over and hid behind the fence. He couldn't run. I found out later what he had was arthritis at a very young age, and he was all crippled up. He got down there, and he looked up, and Joe hung on the limb like that. If you've ever squirrel hunted, you know if a squirrel sees you and you move around to get a shot, the squirrel will shimmy around the branch, keeping the branch between you and him. Joe shimmied around as Mr. Davis walked around the base of this tree. At one point, Mr. Davis reached down. We didn't know what he was going for, but on the ground was this ketchup bottle. Back in the 60s, we didn't have plastic anything. Everything was glass. He picked up this ketchup bottle, which was like a 10-ounce commemorative Coke bottle you see today, NASCAR. Picked it up. Miss Aldridge stopped moving her foot. He grabbed that ketchup bottle, and we looked at him, and we said, no way. The dude's crippled. The dude's old. He can't do it. Joe's hanging on. Next thing we know, Mr. Davis took that bottle with all his might. He threw it. At that time, everything went slow motion. Miss Aldridge is looking. We're like, whoa. Mr. Davis is, and Jody's like that. The bottle went whoo through the air, whistling through the neck of this old bottle. And right when it got up to Joe, it made one more revolution. Whoa! Nailed him right in the temple. If you ever get hit in the head, don't get hit in the temple. Joe tensed up for a second. Miss Aldridge went, ah! We were like, wow! Joe hung on. And eventually his grip loosened, and he came down through the tree, rapping limbs as he came down like an old pinball machine. Wham, 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 wham. When he cleared the tree, he landed flat on his back in this big pile of ashes. Whoosh! Went up like an atomic bomb. We couldn't see him. We couldn't see Miss Aldridge. We couldn't see Mr. Davis. The whole area was engulfed in this ash. We waited. When it finally dissipated, we looked, and Joe was on his back with his tongue hanging out. Mr. Davis looked out and said, don't you ever get in that tree again, and turned and walked back up to the house. We ran over as fast as we could, grabbed Joe. We were shaking him. Miss Aldridge came down through the yard. She was crying and sneezing and sniffling. She went over and grabbed Joe. I don't think we had 911 then, because we never called it. Joe's laying there. We were shaking him. It seemed like forever. His eyes were so far back in his head as we opened his eyes. It was just white. Okay. Rick eventually went up and got two things. One, well, he got the hose, I got the wheelbarrow. We hosed Joe down for a while. I think eventually he got so much water in his mouth he started choking and came out of it. We lifted him up, stuck him in the wheelbarrow him up the house, took him in, threw him on the couch. Nobody looked at him until his mom got home about 5 o'clock. I went up there later, and he had this like size of a softball, this purple lump on the side of his head. You don't think somebody's head could get purple, but it did. The one good thing is Miss Aldridge never yelled at us or said anything to us again. We never got anything back from the yard, but she never came out and harassed us